Welcome, Bruchim Abbaim. I'm Rabbi Paul, your virtual rabbi. This is Katrin, your virtual Rebbitzin, and probably a little bit under camera view, we do have Vasya, your virtual rabbi's cat, who is trying to go sound asleep. And so here we are today, continuing discussion from last week. But first, what do we have today?
Yeah, today I brought a maybe special drink. We hope. We didn't try it. We never had it before. We didn't even sniff it, so we don't really know. But this is a smoothie liqueur. Did I pronounce this right? It's really difficult.
Yes. Yes.
And so it's liquor and liqueur, lemon and basil, and it's probably a hipster drink if you want to put it like this. That was invented to celebrate the 1920s.
Which were quite a crazy time in Berlin.
Yes, exactly. And yeah, it's called Mumpitz. Mumpitz is Berlin dialect word for basically nonsense, or in modern time you call it BS, I guess.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm really excited, and because it's a smoothie that's in there, you have to shake it before you drink it.
And it gives advice on how we should drink it. We're not allowed to shoot this. It says
sippen oder sippen statt nippen.
Yeah.
Nee.
Kippen.
Sippen statt kippen. So don't shoot, but sip it.
We haven't drunk anything yet, I know.
So, okay, it smells interesting. And you should also drink it cold.
So we have 1 cube of ice.
Ooh. It's a heavy bottle. I'm really excited.
And a bracha. Brucha Taranai, Eloheinu Haolam Shechol Niye Bidvaro L'chaim L'chaim.
Oh.
It's refreshing and summery and a little bit like cough syrup. Okay. It's pretty good.
It's like a subtle taste of basil. It's more, the lemon is more in the dominant flavor.
Yeah,
I like
very
that.
much is. It's good.
They also recommend to put it on ice cream. So I think with ice cream, it really, like vanilla ice cream or something. It would really...
There it is. So, day drinking recipes with your rabbi and Rebbitzin. All right.
Yes, so last week we talked about conversion, and I'm just giving a brief summary of what we talked about, I thought. So we started talking about how in biblical times conversion to Judaism was more like a statement of confession, like in Islam today, and partially, I believe, also in Christianity. I know that...
Depending on the sect of Christianity,
right.
Sure.
I know that Christianity also has classes or whatnot that you have to, you know, it's a longer process. So, and it like, our first and most famous Jewish convert was Ruth, who made the statement to Naomi, her mother-in-law, for wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. You people shall be my people, and your God, my God. So that was her statement that made her a Jew.
Yeah, exactly.
And then we continued talking about that, how it gradually changed over time. That conversion became more complicated, or a longer process, which was usually connected to some trauma that the Jewish people experienced, like the Roman-Jewish War was maybe the first trauma, and then Christianity becoming the dominant religion, persecuting Jews, and for instance, like in Spain, it's a long time later then, but in Spain in 1492, when the sovereign wanted to convert all Jews and force them to convert, which then led to the conversos, or the crypto Jews.
Right.
And then I guess the last trauma and the most recent trauma was then the Shoah, which then led to building a fence around Judaism and accepting new people into the tribe. And
exactly.
but like also, for instance, in the Babylonian Talmud, we find this a statement that kind of hints to why and how this trauma manifested or had an influence on how we perceive conversion. And so, for instance, in Yevamot 40a 1747b, and we talked about this part of the Talmud already last week. It, for instance, says that when a person converts, then you should ask for the motivation and say, like, don't you know that the Jewish people at the present time are anguished, suppressed, despised, and harassed, and hardships are frequently visited upon them? And then if this person says, I know, and although I'm unworthy, I want to join the Jewish people, only then you should accept the person. So I was just like, now that I read it, I'm just thinking if this was already also part, it sounds like what a Beit Din is today. So was this already then, was the conversion process already done through a Beit Din, through a court of 3 rabbis or Jews? Oh, we talked about this, I think.
A little bit, yeah. I mean, you'd have the Beit Din all the way back to Talmudic times, how that would have been dealt with. It actually pertains a little bit to maybe a clarification of Ruth. Of course, we don't know exactly how, Ruth would have been essentially during the time of the Judges. And we don't know what was going on during the book of Judges. We just have the narrative. Yeah. But we do have a few hints, Talmudic hints, and that are hinted at from the book of Judges that, and we mentioned this again last week, you've got this Jewish Valentine's Day, Tu B'Av, so the 15th day of the month of Av, where you were allowed to court someone who was a member of another tribe. And we keep on thinking of Jews, but probably underestimate the power of the original tribes. These tribes would go to war with each other, and then they would come together as a confederacy whenever they had to fight off a foreign enemy. But, you start, basically you have family, tribe, and then larger tribes. So, if you were more loyal to the tribe of Dan than you were to a larger confederation. And so within even the time of Ruth, you'd have the declaration, but you'd have to also have acceptance into the tribe. Sure. And so I think that one of the things that there are implications for today to show that, yes, things have changed radically, but on the other hand, not so much, because that statement that your God will be my God, your people will be my people, that statement is still read in many conversion processes. So in most Beit Din that I've been a part of, the Teoda, or the conversion document, would include with it that quote in the lingua franca, so in German or French or English, and then also in Hebrew, which is kind of a little final test, because you should have some Hebrew when you go to Beit Din. And can I read this in English or German or whatever? And can I read it in Hebrew? So you do have that reflection of that reality, that statement, but then the amount of time that it takes. I could also make the argument, instead of saying we've lost the authenticity of a declaration, I've had people literally come to me and say, listen, I identify as Jewish. Why can't I just be accepted as Jewish? Mm-hmm. And the answer is there probably never was a time where that was the case. You still at that point would have had to have been adopted into the tribe, and who knows how long of a process that would have taken as well. So I think that as complicated as today, we can actually go the other direction from what we said last week. Last week we were talking about the vast amount of evolution from step A to step B, step A being the Ruth model of a declaration, step B being a minimum of a year of study and all the complexity that exists in acceptance today. And you could probably go back and say, it might not actually have been that different. Now in the Talmud, it says on that very day. But then I would also say, yes, but how long would it take you after being accepted as a Jew to be accepted as Jewish by the community around you?
Right. I mean, but this is, I think, what is reflected in Ruth already, that she was a part of that tribe.
Yes.
She was married to...
Yes, exactly. Boaz.
So, yeah. And so she, I guess, I guess we can assume that she was already close with Ruth, and I guess working with her in the kitchen or whatnot.
Naomi, yeah.
Naomi, oh God. Yes, that's what I meant.
Strong core.
guess I just confuse the names all the time. Anyway, but she was a part of this family. She worked with her mother-in-law, I don't know, in the field, in the kitchen or whatnot, and organized the household or everything around it. And so she was already a part of that tribe. And then in the end, she just made this statement to confirm that this is her family now, which, by the way, then reminds me of a book that I read, and I think you read it too, which is only available, I believe, in German. It's called Nicht durch Geburt allein.
Yeah, I wish it was available in English.
Yeah. Maybe we can ask Walter Homolka if we can translate it to English. I mean, he was the...
Actually, not a bad idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So he was the publisher.
Yeah, the compiler and publisher. Yeah.
And it's the title means...
For those of you in the States, Walter Homolka is the rector of the Abraham Geiger Kolleg, which is the primary non-Orthodox ordaining rabbinical school in Europe, in Central Europe in general, and started in 1999, ordained its first group of students in 2006 in Dresden.
Yeah, and this was the school that you went to.
That I have my smicha from. This.
Yeah, so he's also a rabbi and a doctor and a professor and so on. So I don't just want to mention this.
Written somewhere around 7,300 books or something like that.
Not that we get this wrong and just call him
right.
By his name.
Yes.
He also has several titles, but it's too long to mention all.
For those of you who are listening from the States, let's just have fun with this for a second. The proper way to address him would be Herr Professor Rabbiner Dr. Honoris Clausus Walter Homolka. So welcome to Germany.
Exactly. It's great that you can remember how to say this. Anyway, so the title means not only through birth.
Right. Not through birth alone. Yeah.
Not through birth alone, which is a book about conversion and the complexity of conversion. Like because I think what a lot of times people forget, it's that it's like human beings who seek something, and these human beings, just like everyone, are complex people and have a complex history or a complex background or whatever. Yeah. And so the story of Ruth, it just reminds me of this one story in the book where they talk about a woman, a Christian woman, who was the servant.
It was a maid. I think,
maid,
yeah.
Okay, whatever. Let's call it maid. A maid in a Jewish family. And she lived there from a very early age. And after the parents or her employers died, she stayed with the son, and I think was also a maid. Somehow there was also, if I remember correctly, then they were also kind of became a couple, and and she was really old already at the time that I think they actually married, and then she realized she cannot be buried with him, and then she I guess was pretty confused, and then went to a Beit Din or to a rabbi, and then also in the Beit Din they talked about it, that she said, I don't know anything else, I came to this family when I was a teenager, and I don't know what's different between Christianity and Judaism. Isn't this, I just know Judaism basically because she really was a part of that family. And I think this is what happened with Ruth too. She was part of this family, and there was nothing else that existed for her. It was just Christianity, and Judaism was a label that was not real, so she didn't really know.
She acted upon the reality that she was Jewish without realizing what she was doing.
Yeah, she was Jewish. And so I just mentioned the story because I think this is really something that rabbis are faced with. Yeah. That,
I've literally had, so there's two sides to it. I've literally had people in my offices demand that I acknowledge their Jewishness for a variety of reasons. One, they found out that they had a Jewish great-grandparent. I had one person demand to be acknowledged as Jewish because they shared a name with famous Jews in Germany. And I had people yell at me and scream at me and walk out in tears because I wouldn't do that. And so there is that one point where people want the Ruthian experience without understanding the deeper complexity that, and if I remember correctly, and I'll have to go back, I haven't read Nicht durch Geburt allein in years, but if I remember right, the Beit Din basically said there's no conversion necessary, and gave her a Teudah, so that her identity was confirmed as Jewish, because she was completely and utterly Jewish. But how much time are we talking about here? And so that's part of it. There is, even back in the Ruthian experience, most likely a time and acceptance aspect. And that's what's really, really hard, because I think that part of the difficulty in society today, and I know this is going to come out as political, and it's not meant to be political whatsoever, but there is absolutely a dissonance between the idea of personal identity and group acceptance. And Judaism does not exist solely as an individual path.
Exactly.
If anyone comes and sees Judaism as this will make me happy, then you shouldn't convert to Judaism. First of all,
definitely not.
Zero promises within Judaism for happiness. That does not exist. Part of the conversion process is to is the question of why would you even want to do that? Because now you're obligated to all these obligations. And in Judaism, because we don't believe that we're right, this idea of why would you do this? You can enter the kingdom of heaven through living a moral life, is the Jewish idea. So why would you want to then arbitrarily take upon yourself to then observe the Sabbath with all of its rules, to observe dietary restrictions? And it's a very complicated sort of thing, because we don't have this missionizing, proselytizing sort of idea, that it's very confusing to many Jews why anyone would want to take the onus of being a Jew upon oneself, as well as the burden or the yoke of the mitzvot. But yet at the same point, so people step in saying, this will fulfill me, this will make me happy, and not understand that Judaism does not exist as a this will make me. It's I'm a part of an us. And there is an individual responsibility, my individual mitzvot, then there's our collective responsibility, and without both of them simultaneously, Judaism doesn't exist, which is why conversion through a process, as unpleasant as it could be, is absolutely necessary. And I'll take it one step further, and this is my one soapbox for the day. People who come in and say, I feel entitled to have my identity recognized as a Jew because I feel very strongly that I'm Jewish and I don't want to go through the process, are participating in an act of nullification of the Jews. And I hear this a lot. Now, I know that there's probably some people who listen to this podcast who come from a Messianic tradition. And, I've always said, if a Messianic, so someone who is a Christian but believes very strongly that Jewish ritual should still be practiced, so the Jewish chagim and that sort of thing. I've actually had Messianics in my adult education and synagogues, and I've always said, as long as you don't proselytize, you're welcome to learn like everyone else. These doors are wide open for learning. As soon as there's proselytization, you're gone. It's over. And I think that some of the worst discussions I've had with Jews for Jesus and Messianism is trying to tell me what Judaism is so that they can be fully accepted as Jewish by their definition. And part of why we get to say, as unpleasant as it can be, there is a process and there is authority involved. Part of the reason that we get to say that is because we've paid for the price. And because there is a metaphysical aspect to the halakha, whether you're born Jewish or converted to Judaism, you get to use the we have paid the price, which is then part of what we discussed last week. That's very hard for born Jews to hear someone who converted to Judaism say a we in that one. And that's maybe something we can discuss further or not. So that Ruth point, I think, becomes bigger and bigger and bigger and truer and truer and truer. Ruth was not accepted walking out of the sand saying, hey, everyone, I believe I'm Jewish. Your God's my God. Your people's my people. She was a living, breathing part of Jewish society.
Yeah, I agree. As you talked about, Judaism is not an individual religion.
Or solely an individual.
Like, solely, yeah. Or like the main focus isn't an individual religion. I just wanted to talk about exactly that, because I think what people don't maybe underestimate is that Judaism is really it's a family that you convert into.
Right.
It's not, you cannot go to a church alone, in a church, you go there, light a candle, and then you pray. But it's always a collective effort, a group effort or whatnot. Prayer is happens in a group and not or is is worth more in a I don't know how to say this.
Well, I
You
mean,
know
even,
what I mean?
yeah, even within
Like,
Christianity, there's a statement in the Christian Bible that says, "Where two among you are agreeing, I am present." So, even though there's a monastic tradition within Christianity, even within Christianity, there's an acknowledgement of a power of
yeah,
the
but
group.
you can pray alone,
Yes,
and
but you
it
can't,
has the
exactly.
same value
Right.
as if you pray in a group. And in Judaism we have the a minyan, and if you pray in a minyan, then it's always better. I don't know how to phrase it, but
Yeah.
it's elevated, I think, the prayer in general. And so I think this is something that then causes this, that you really convert into a family. And just as in a family you always have people that you like and that you don't like, then that you like you, and there are always discussions, arguments, and also positive experiences. And I think this is very underestimated. If you convert, you think that, as you said, like this happiness aspect is just not there all the time.
Right.
A lot of times, yes, if you have a positive experience, but it's always kind of this, up and down. And like, did you have any experiences with your conversion students that had that were distressed because the tribe didn't accept them the way they expected it?
So I have a speech that I give to every conversion candidate that I call the chutzpah. Man, I can't even think of the name of it. It's the chutzpah speech, but it's the chutzpah acceptance speech, and there's two parts of it. It's the splash of cold water, and the first part of the splash of cold water is the acceptance one, which is no matter what you do, at some level, there's a possibility you'll never be universally accepted. So if you convert through a non-Orthodox Beit Din and you make Aliyah to Israel, which you can do, for example, being Jewish makes you eligible for the right of the return, which is one of the reasons that conversion is also important, is that it's actually a legal international citizenship right, and so therefore should be taken seriously, regardless of one's feelings about Medinat Israel. A rabbi's responsibility includes that they can be a passport into citizenship of a country, but you will not be accepted as Jewish by the chief rabbinate, who has complete control over status issues all the way back to 1948. Probably a discussion for a different podcast, in Israel.
Which then leads to that you cannot marry whoever you want if you want to.
That's exactly it. So there's always someone who's not going to accept you. The way to get the most universal acceptance is probably to find a way to get a visa in Israel and then go into the chief rabbinate's 2-year class. And I've had people who've gone through that. Passionate people who are drawn in every way of responsibility and connection to the Jewish people, and then go through that conversion process and have never gone to shul again because they've been so turned off by the process. So, there's a complication there. And I also want to throw it out there. The chief rabbinate is not a halakhic agency. The fact that the chief rabbinate exists, it's an invention of the Ottoman Empire, so that the Ottoman Empire knew where to go for one person to say who answers for all the Jewish people that are in Eretz Israel. So the British mandate then kept a hold of that. So this is actually a political office that somehow has taken over a popeship for the Jewish people. And if you can hear my anger and my polemic here, the Jews don't have a pope. We have different arguments, and like should exist in society, the better argument should float to the top and should then transform society. So that's the first part, is the understanding that if you convert in the United States in a Reform Beit Din, you will not be accepted as a Jew in an Orthodox synagogue under most circumstances, although not all. That's just what. And so if someone doesn't understand that, then they shouldn't go through the entire conversion process with me, because I can't sign my name under a teuda that's going to be accepted universally. So that's the first one. The chutzpah one is a combination of the boldness one has to have in the Jewish community, which can be very difficult because some of us are very introverted, some of us are shy, some of us, have social anxiety. But you never can expect in a Jewish community that people are going to open the doors, roll out the red carpet, and say, here, let us work really hard to find your place in the community. Part of the responsibility of converting into the tribe of Abraham and Sarah is to give back, which means to volunteer, to serve, to be a part of that, but to find one's own path. And that can be very difficult. No one's going to find it for you. And so you have to step out in boldness, even if that's difficult. We always have to overcome ourselves. I have paralyzing social anxiety. Most people don't know that because of how I'm able to speak in public. Katrin knows that I've got paralyzing social anxiety.
That's what I just think about. Are introverts bad candidates for conversion to Judaism?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Yeah. But the final part of the acceptance there, I'm going to just leave that one alone for now. The final part on acceptance there is you will, oftentimes when conversion happens, there's an idealization of Judaism.
Yep.
And we Jews do not often reflect the ideals of Judaism very well. And so there is a disillusionment that comes in every process of illusion, where of conversion, where you step into this adoption of family and adoption of ritual and adoption of belief to a much smaller, but adoption of pattern of existence, ritual existence. And someone's going to look at you and say, who the hell are you? You're not a Jew. And then the term fake Jew or something like that. And it hurts. And I know people who have experienced that once and have never come back into a synagogue, which is why I prepare people in advance. Not prepare people for failure, but prepare people for, you may encounter this. This may happen. And I'd rather that someone already knows. Of course, hearing about it and then experiencing it are two radically different things. And, why is that acceptance as it is? Well, we talked a little bit about last week. There's a lot of reasons. A lot of Jews just don't understand why someone would want to convert. But a lot of Jews also, very unfortunately, accepted Hitler's definition of Judaism. And this idea that you can only be a Jew if you have a drop of Jewish blood. And when I say things like one drop, hopefully anyone who's studied racism and racism in history know how problematic that is. I'm very deliberately using that term. And so this idea that I can only accept you as Jewish if Hitler would have accepted you as Jewish. I just want us to marinate on that for a little while, and see if that isn't giving Hitler a posthumous victory, since Judaism says very clearly conversion is a pathway to full acceptance into being as if you're born Jewish.
Right. This is also reflected in our through our sages that I don't remember where it is, but at some point it is said that the children of Amalek converted to Judaism and were also accepted as Jews, because we cannot hold a grudge against the children of
even our worst enemies.
Of our worst enemies,
yeah.
But this also reminds me of as you just said about you're a full Jew once you're immersed into the mikvah. This is also not the reality in real life. I think you have to prove, I guess, this is like why you have to engage also. Right. You have to kind of prove that you're serious about it. And I really think it's an outcome of the traumas that Jews experienced throughout the centuries.
Well, I obviously have been multiple times polemic already, but we should be able to position ourselves in the arguments of everyone. I mean, remember, studying Torah isn't about learning how to see the Moses within us. It's also learning how to see the Pharaoh within us. Yeah. So if we only see ourselves reflected in Moses, we've missed the point, because sometimes we're the oppressed and sometimes we're the oppressor. Yeah. Sometimes we're Pharaoh, sometimes we are Moses. And so it's the same sort of thing. You go to the Jewish standpoint, born Jewish standpoint, and there is the confusion, because if someone did grow up experiencing anti-Semitism, and again, in the United States, there has been the greatest period of Jews being allowed to have agency in the history of post-temple Judaism. And even within the United States of America, we forget about the ghettoization previous to World War II, where Jews could only live in certain parts of major cities and that sort of thing. And we forget about the districting. We forget about the places like Tavistock Country Club that up until, I don't even know if they do now, but up until recently, at least, did not accept Jews as membership. And so we forget about the institutional issues that existed and the barriers that existed within the states. Nonetheless, it was the greatest freedom that Jews ever had. But that being said, Jews, unless you grow up in very specific situations, have historically experienced incredible animosity for them being Jewish because of we can't forget that that anti-Semitism, started as anti-Jewishness, goes all the way back to, at the very least, the 4th century. And so part of the fantasy after the Holocaust is that anti-Semitism would be wiped out because the world saw how horrible that was. And that was an illusion. So you can't undo institutional Jewish hate, Judenhass, which eventually became anti-Semitism in the 18th, 19th century. You can't undo 1,600 years of hatred with 3 years of guilt because there are videotapes of Auschwitz and Dachau. And so from a Jewish standpoint, it's most of the time when people utter things like fake Jew, as awful and horrible as it is, if you step into, position oneself within that person, oftentimes it's just utter confusion. I don't understand why you would subject yourself willingly to something that has been deeply painful to me. And I think that's hard for people to understand. And so therefore, it's easy to say, oh, that's stupidity, that's ignorance, that's cruelty. Okay, it's also understandable if one has experienced that oneself. Now, what one does with that, okay, so I see that you're converting, I'm going to do everything I can to destroy you and hate you, then that's stupidity and ignorance. It's also unethical, immoral, and anti-Torah in every way, shape, or form. And I think we should condemn that behavior as quickly as possible. But the fact that there are reasons why one might be very confused and react poorly when it comes to conversion, especially if the convert has more knowledge about Judaism than they do, that is at least a little bit understandable. And so we ask to have compassion with us. We should have compassion with others and learn where people are coming from. And that is the Torah path as well. So here we're talking about the methodology and the mechanics behind conversion. And what we've already gotten to is even conversion prompts us to profound dialogic discussions about ethics and morality.
Yeah. One question that I was thinking about last week when we talked is there actually a higher percentage of women that convert to Judaism than men?
Yes. Yeah, I don't have the exact figures on that one. So my personal experience, which should not be universalized at that point, I've sat on maybe 20 plus Beit Din in my life. My experience is it's usually about somewhere 4 out of 5 to 9 out of 10. I think that there are, if you go back to the 5 categories of who converts, you will see kind of some of the overlaps in that one. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, then go back and watch last week's podcast. But for better or for worse, it is more common for a Jewish male to demand of a female that they are marrying to say, I want you to join my religion, than it is the other direction around. And whether that's good or bad, how we feel about that sociologically, that's just how it is. And I'm more than happy to find the statistics overall if one wants to look at that. That's number one. Number two, and this is something acknowledged in the Talmud, oftentimes you will find among women more of that sense of spirituality through interrelationship and the experience of motherhood and those sorts of things. And if this conversation makes people uncomfortable, it is what it is. I'm talking scientifically, I'm talking psychologically, I'm talking the big 5 personality traits and all that sort of thing. But what you will find is people who are interested in stepping out of themselves for an exploration of spirituality via relationship will be more often among women than among men. And so you will find more of the people who are the spiritual seekers finding Judaism. You'll find that more among women than you will among men. So like I said, it's not 60-40 in my experience. It's much more like 80-20, if not more.
Well, I was like, somehow this was also my impression, for instance, in Israel, where you think it's easier to convert, but like, because we have the matrilineal inheritance,
right?
of the religion, of the faith or whatever, I had this impression that if the woman is Jewish, then the man thinks like, yeah, well, the children are Jewish, even if they live in Israel. And so I don't have to, go through that process.
I've seen that.
And, and then in addition, and I don't know if that's true or not, it also, the children are Jewish anyway, because the mother is Jewish. And also, I think because of circumcision, it might be more difficult for men to
Yes, so
join the tribe.
You've absolutely brought up the second part of it, and obviously this manifests more today than it did 20 years ago in the United States. Obviously, it manifests more outside the United States and inside the United States. When I was born, I think it was 75 to 85% of males were circumcised medically. So that means if someone grew up Methodist and then decided so someone who's a Gen Xer like me and decided to convert to Judaism, chances were they wouldn't have to go through circumcision. As an adult, they'd go through a hatvat dam brit, so a ceremonial drop of blood, which if done properly is completely and utterly painless. If done improperly, which I've heard horror stories. Okay, I'm not going to get into it. But yes, that is a barrier. That's a stumbling block. And it's complicated because right now there is across the world a growing anti-circumcision movement where there's a conflation of circumcision, male circumcision with female. And I'd say anyone who says male circumcision is the same as female, that's coming from either naivety, ignorance, or anti-Semitism at that point, because one is universally acknowledged as mutilation and the other one is most certainly not. I don't want to get too deeply into this. I went to school and graduated with one of the world's greatest experts in circumcision, Dr. Rabbinerin Antje Yael Deusel, who's a rabbi in Bamberg, Germany, and also a board-certified urologist, and is also a Mohelet, which is an interesting discussion of female rights, because being a Mohelet is something that's been acknowledged for a very long time in Halakha, that there's no barrier to that. And within female mutilation, that is universally condemned. Within male circumcision, you have the World Health Organization that has called for universal circumcision because of health issues, and the American Medical Association says the only reason they don't call for universal circumcision is because it's such an emotional issue. So, if someone calls out and says that's purely mutilation, then there's something else going on. There's science behind it. There is, the idea that it only does harm. I have enough anecdotes of men who, sounds like no men have ever worked with me. I've had multiple men work with me in conversion, have gone through circumcision, and it's incredibly uncomfortable. It's not fun. And then after the fact, I haven't had a single one. And if you are different and you want to actually make the comment and we make this into a different podcast, it'd be a very uncomfortable podcast, but welcome to BeitVirtuali, who have said that after the fact, there's no difference. It's not problematic. So, adults going through who experienced active sex life beforehand, active sex life afterhand, after the healing, no issues there. So the call that it's absolutely a negative thing. But that being said, that's off topic. It's absolutely a barrier because as an adult, it is dangerous compared to how it is as a child. And it is problematic. And there are people who argue very much against it. And there is dialogue involved. And I totally get it. And because this isn't the main topic of today, I won't go into how I feel about it. But yes, that's probably maybe even a bigger reason if someone's not already circumcised.
Sorry. Yeah, but I'm sorry, I have to continue with this topic. I'm just like...
She did it. This is her fault now.
Yeah. What I'm wondering is today's procedure recognized, like the medical procedure of circumcision, is it recognized by let's say Jewish law? I'm just asking this because there was actually a change in circumcision, because when the Greeks penetrated into the Jewish world, or into like what's today known as Israel, in like 2,000 years ago, or more than 2,000 years ago, they introduced to Jewish people the ancient Olympic Games, and this caused Jews, because it was done naked, Jews wanted to participate, and then they would try to, reverse the circumcision, to not, because the Greeks were not circumcised, and this caused a change in Judaism, that circumcision is done in a way that it cannot be reversed.
Right.
And so I'm wondering if today's medical procedures are actually then sufficient,
Yes.
good enough to
Well, the
be
answer.
accepted.
So the answer is yine. The circumcision procedures of today, in most cases, and without going into the medicine of it, and if people are super curious, we're more than welcome
really
to.
sorry.
Yeah, no, I'm more than
No,
happy.
I'm actually not.
I'm more than happy to get Dr. Rabina Deusel
Yes.
onto a Zoom and if there's a demand for this podcast, we'll actually get Rabbi Deusel on to be the expert and to actually have this conversation, because when this conversation was had in Germany when I was a rabbi in Duisburg, the conversation, so really, really long story, very, very short. There was a circumcision scandal in 2011 or 2012 in North Rhine-Westphalia in Germany, where there was actually a Muslim child who was circumcised, and the mother, against order of the person who did the circumcision, which happens at about age 4, depending on the family, the child started to bleed out. The mother took the child back to the person who did the circumcision, was warned again, don't take the bandages off for X amount of time, went back home, immediately took the bandages off, he started bleeding out, so the mother called the police. So as uncomfortable as this story can make us, this is what happened. And so the person who was then in legal jeopardy was not the mother for not following a doctor's advice. It was the person who did the circumcision. And there was a massive movement in Germany to outlaw circumcision at the time. I, as a congregational rabbi, dealt with literally daily phone calls of people calling up and screaming in German, which is never fun to be on the end of a phone call. Warum verschont ihr ihre Kinder? Why do you mutilate your children? And then they would hang up. Someone shot at the synagogue during that time, and we had death threats on a daily basis. So not exactly reasonable way of dealing with that. So when that debate happened, what happened is German media, which I think used to be much more objective, and they've also just become much more typical media, in order to sensationalize it, they would bring on to discuss the importance of circumcision. It fell on the Jews of Germany, by the way, to defend it, which is the sad irony of the entire situation. And so, not any disrespect to, I think, some amazing human beings who happen to be Orthodox rabbis in this country, but they brought on certain Orthodox rabbis who says we have to do circumcision because it's demanded in Torah. When in Germany in the year 2012, it would have been much better to have someone as articulate and amazing as Rabbi Deusel on there saying, listen, my doctoral dissertation's on this, my thesis is on this, I'm a urologist, here is all of the information that we need to give here. So if we have this discussion, what you're not going to hear from me ever is we do it because Torah did it. It's always much more complicated than that. And from the Maimonidean standpoint, there's always a rational argument that we can step into it. And if it doesn't make sense, there's no rational argument, and it does harm, I'd be the first person out at the lead saying, we need to get rid of this right now. So anyway, if we want to have the discussion, we can have the discussion. The end part of that is it's yes or no, because there are multiple conditions for which someone medically or cosmetically would have a circumcision. Under most circumstances, that would be a circumcision that would be halakhic. The way that it's supposed to work is you should be examined by a moil, who then does the hatfat dam brit. So someone who is an expert in Jewish laws around circumcision, and most people who are moil today are actually a medical doctor as well. It's not universal, but it's very, very common. You would then have the moil examine and say that this is appropriate. So I've done at this point 30 hatfat dam brit, I think, between 20 and 30, maybe not 30, between 20 and 30. And so I consider myself qualified by doing the study in order to be able to do the hatfat dam brit, and that's part of it, is me just double checking in the most humble way possible. And you know what? The fact that we ended up on this conversation, I think that this is part of why we have BeitVirtuali. This is part of why we do this. Sometimes discussing the complexity of Judaism is incredibly uncomfortable. And unless we figure out, again, to have disagreements and to have uncomfortable discussions, we're lost. And so we need a podcast within Judaism that's going to make people mad and be uncomfortable and allow for dialogue and disagreement. And if you disagree with me or with Katrin on any of this, then let us know and we'll continue the dialogue. We won't accept hate, but we'll absolutely accept disagreement on that one. And circumcision, I didn't even think that we'd talk about it, but it's absolutely one of the requirements of conversion. And so it's something that has to be brought into the conversation. And yes, I have in my conversion document, which I send to people, I might as well actually just put it up on BeitVirtuali.org so you can actually read what I would send to people if they wanted to convert. One of the things that it says is you will have to be circumcised if you're not already circumcised, or you will have to go through Hatvat Dambrit if you, and that for me is an absolute requirement. That is not universal now. There are actually rabbis 100% who do not require circumcision. That's a different discussion. That's very common within America. I don't want to say it's common, I'm sorry. That's something that's becoming more prevalent within American reform.
Yeah.
I have my own feelings about that, but if you want to know them, you'll have to ask the darn questions.
Yeah, but this is like what I find great about Judaism, that it's not like circumcision doesn't make Jews uncomfortable.
Right.
I remember this one time when I was when I had a Shabbos dinner with an Orthodox family, and they suddenly talked about Brit Milah, and I was like, okay, interesting.
Yeah.
And you would think that Orthodox people don't talk about penises, but they did.
Quite on the other hand, yes.
So
there it is. Let's see if
because
YouTube takes down this video because we said the word penis.
is this on an index, or is it
I have
censored?
no idea
I
because
just thought female breasts are not
you're not allowed to see them, but I think you can talk about them.
No, nipples. You're not allowed to see.
I think you can say, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're not monetized via YouTube anyway because I think you have to have 10,000 subscribers, and we're a little ways away from that.
So, just saying.
Too much circumcision, not enough l'chaim. Baruch atah Adonai melech haolam, shechol niyeh b'varo.
Amen.
L'chaim.
I really like
every sip it gets tastier, I have to say.
We didn't find it.
No, I liked it from the beginning. Every sip it gets tastier.
Yeah, it has like a vanilla
It's
taste to it too.
really good. It's also, even though it's even though it is basil, there's almost a rosemary-ish sort of taste to it as well from that herbal. It's a good, subtle, pervasive herbalness to it.
So as we talk about food, and food is really important in Judaism.
Yes. I hope you all know the definition of Judaism. They tried to kill us. They didn't succeed. Let's eat. Okay.
Just not on Yom Kippur.
Just not on Yom Kippur.
Anyway, but so do you think it's relevant? As I guess most people know, there are different streams or different origins of Judaism, like Ashkenazim, the originally German Jews, and or in today's like the Western world.
You sure? I mean, it's you have Sephardic Jews in the States, and some of the first were, but generally,
what I wanted to ask. I wanted to say, do you think it's relevant if someone wants to convert, that they actually, as we talked about food, and in Ashkenaz Judaism, for instance, gefilte fish is a must-have, must-eat, I don't know what. I don't eat it. I actually hate it. Just the rabbi told me that there's a Czech version that is good, but I never ate it. So, and then there are Sephardic Jews who have much better food. So, do you think it's relevant if you want to convert that you know like the food, and that you decide, if I love hummus, then I have to marry into a Sephardic family, or I have to convert under a Sephardic rabbi, or not?
It's very hard to convert in almost every Sephardic community. It's the barrier to conversion is much, much, much greater. So, and I think part of the reason is generally speaking, Reform came out of Germany, so I guess by definition it's Ashkenaz. Yeah. But American Reform especially, there's much more of this will sound pejorative, it's not, but a pastiche aesthetic, much more of a syncretic view of Judaism that you are willing to take melodies from a variety of Jewish practices. So you'll see synagogues like B'nai Jeshurun in New York, which if you've never been to B'nai Jeshurun, You should go at least once in your life. Some of the greatest music you will ever hear in a synagogue. It's conservative-ish synagogue. The founder of Bnei Jeshurun came out of the Masorti rabbinical school in Argentina. And so it's musical instruments, but it's a mixture of neo-Hasidic and world music, deeply influenced by Arabic melodies, deeply influenced by Sephardic melodies. And so you will see more syncretic versions of that, but that's more aesthetic for the sake of ritual. I know a lot of converts who have then tried to embrace and, as they go to Israel and stay with a Moroccan family and then all of a sudden want to have that experience. So generally speaking, people who convert by accidents of history will be converting into a dominantly Ashkenazi aesthetic, which includes the food behind it. And because it's adoption into a family, what's more important than eating with the family at a cultural level, at an acceptance level? And it's interesting because going back to the book you cited at the very beginning, Nicht durch Geburt allein, one of the stories is actually Rebbetzin Magonite, the wife of a very prominent, important British rabbi. And she's German, and she made the incredibly provocative statement that I used to hate and used to offend me so much, that on the day of your conversion you become a Jew, and then it takes you years afterwards to become Jewish. Reflect that with our earlier conversation, you see that, but part of what she's referring to is the experience of learning how to bake challah. And quite frankly, I'm not saying that for women, I'm saying that for men and women. I think everyone who converts should have the experience of the Jewish kitchen. I think that my matzah kugel is among the best on the face of this planet. Thank you very much. Of course, I use curry and 4 different cheeses, and you can see the sneering happening over on this side of the peanut gallery here. I would say it's essential if one understands that one is being adopted into a family, then it, as well as adopting a religious tradition, it follows that you are then going to be eating at the table of Abraham and Sarah as well. Of course, Abraham and Sarah ate non-kosher, or non-rabbinically kosher, so that's a different discussion.
Yeah, but then at the same time, and I just say this to complete the picture, is there are a lot of Jewish people who can't cook. Just saying.
True story.
So I don't know how to bake challah. I just don't like it.
You've made challah before and it's been delicious, so.
Yeah, it was more like a fake challah, but I just rated something that was bread-like. But I'm gonna buy challah and not bake it. And you don't bake either.
I am a cook. I am, with no humility whatsoever, a very good cook. I have created fusion versions of almost every Ashkenaz delicacy that there is and turned it into a fusion Asian, French, Ashkenaz sort of thing, meant to offend everyone on the face of this planet, but it's what I like to eat, and those of you who've eaten my food, even Katrine, who will never admit it, it's darn delicious. So, we get to add our levels of interpretation onto Torah. And if Torah is gefilte fish, then my very spicy version of it is my interpretation of the gefilte fish.
You should definitely do this at some point.
Okay, I will.
I will actually try it.
It's based on a Czech recipe, which is actually done as a loaf with carrots in it. It's brilliant and delicious and absolutely amazing.
Okay,
Yeah.
Great. So we already talked about the Beit Din. That is today consists of like after you're studied, then you go to a Beit Din, which consists of 3 rabbis.
Or 3 Jews educated in the laws of conversion, which today would mean 3 rabbis.
Yeah, exactly. So, and we talked about the Beit Din. Maybe you can just elaborate briefly, without giving too much details away, how a Beit Din is, what happens.
Yeah, I think that's actually really important because that's another barrier. It's almost as scary for people as circumcision. We talked earlier about anxiety, and I think anxiety is something that's reaching epidemic levels as well. And I think social media is to blame, and a variety of other things. I mean, we live with insecurity, we live with anxiety, we live with fear, and the idea that I'm going to go in front of a group of 3 people, most likely rabbis, who are going to ask me questions. Well, at least in the States and to some extent in Europe, the idea is they're going to give me a test. And so, I mean, I literally had, and I'm not going to say at what synagogue, someone come to me once and say, I can't come to service because I have to study for my Beit Din. This was someone who went through the conversion process before I got there. And my answer to that was, you've missed the point entirely. I didn't say that. I tried to say that in a very gentle way. The experiential aspect is more important. A Beit Din is not a test, although there are objective questions that are asked. So the purpose of a Beit Din is very simple. When you step into a Beit Din, either you're Jewish or you're not. Maybe better put, you are a Jew or you're not. And so I have a few things that I ask commonly. The most common thing that's going to be asked is, why are you here? And if the answer is, so you can wave a magic wand and make me a Jew, then that's a highly problematic answer, because either you already have accepted yourself at that moment and you just need the formal recognition, or you're not. And I realize that might sound scary because, oh, you've got an arbitrary answer you're looking for. No, because obviously people are nervous. So I'm looking for not just the arbitrary answer, but someone's understanding of what they're doing. So I do have some, and most rabbis who are in a Beit Din have objective questions that they ask. So if you're ever in a Beit Din with me, my trick question is always, what's the next holiday? Because the next holiday is almost always Shabbat, unless tomorrow is Rosh Hashanah. And if someone hasn't actually internalized the fact that the most important holiday in Judaism is Shabbat, just the fact that it happens every week does not demean the fact that it is the single most important holiday that we have. That's key. If we don't understand the importance of Shabbat, then we haven't internalized ritual Judaism in any way, shape, or form. So my question was not to see if someone has the right answer. My question is to see how someone would be in dialogue with what I'm asking. That's ultimately what a Beit Din is doing. And most Beit Din have an idea of what they're going to say in the first 5 minutes of a Beit Din. That's not universal, but it's usually so clear when someone who is a Jew steps into the room and someone who's struggling. Now, there are a few other things that I do. When someone is my candidate, I've already done this vetting, but I want to see if they believe that Jesus is God. Because especially people who are converting for the sake of marriage, who grew up in a Christian tradition, removing one theological idea and then replacing it with another. I know that sounds really problematic, but in Judaism, Jesus is not God. At best, Jesus is a prophet. That's more the Islamic view. Within Judaism, a radical rabbi, who was one of many radical rabbis who was murdered by Pontius Pilate, who killed about 50,000 Jews through crucifixion at that time. So I'm trying to actually ascertain if there's a barrier that would keep me from putting my signature on that. And it's not necessarily based on knowledge. So if someone comes in who've taught themselves fluent Hebrew and who it's clear that in 10 years they're going to be going to rabbinical school, you better believe that the questions that I go to start going higher and higher and higher, because I want to push and see how far someone's gone. One, because I'm excited. Two, because there's the humility of, when I went to rabbinical school in the first year, I thought I knew everything. By the time I got to the fifth year, I realized I knew nothing. And so then they gave me my smicha when I realized I didn't know anything. I think that that's the same sort of thing. We have the illusion at the Beit Din that we've actually learned something, and we should actually have the humility of realizing this is the beginning of a lifetime of learning. So the Beit Din is a gatekeeper to help make sure that the person who is being accepted into the conversion and the adoption is going to elevate Klal Yisrael and not tear Klal Yisrael down. And that can be torn down by bringing in another religion and then demanding that that be the truth of it. So again, proselytizing within Judaism. It can be someone who's unwillingly stepping in there. If it's clear that I would not do this, even after a year, 2 years of studying, if I were not getting married, I will not sign the Teudah. Because again, I'm not there to make someone happy. I'm there to actually be a gatekeeper for Klal Yisrael. And I guess the final aspect that I would mention on that, because I think that I'm not alone. Other rabbis might look at this differently, and some Beit Din are much more strict than others. In Germany, for example, there are two Beit Din. There's the non-Orthodox and there's the Orthodox one. You cannot put together an ad hoc Beit Din. In America, among the Reform movement, that's all the Beit Din are, is ad hoc Beit Din. And I always sought people in those Beit Din that I had profound respect for, and I'm very proud of my colleagues, and one who's a lifelong friend who I met kind of through inviting onto the Beit Din. So there's a variety of who might be sitting on it and their level of interest in what's going on there. But what I've always said to my candidates is, I'm not going to send you to a Beit Din unless I know what the answer is going to be. And I'm very proud of the fact that I've never a single time sent someone to Beit Din who has not had their Teudah signed by that Beit Din. Not all rabbis are the same on that one. There are some rabbis who have very large conversion classes and move a lot of people through. And I think that that was maybe appropriate in America when there were many, many Reform synagogues, and it was pretty much guaranteed that if you converted within Reform, you would never go to another synagogue in your life. I think that that's highly problematic in an international area where, say you converted at age 25, you would have a high probability of being asked to go into a conservative synagogue and Orthodox in your life, maybe moving to a different country with all the mobility, at least pre-COVID. In which case, our responsibility in a Beit Din is not only to the Jew, but to all other communities, even if that person won't be accepted in an Orthodox community. I'm going to damn well make sure that they can sit in an Orthodox service and understand what's going on and feel like they're still part of that. Otherwise, how awful are they going to feel about their own conversion if they're in an Orthodox service and say, I don't know what's happening. So the Beit Din is a big job, but it's not a test. It's not oral examinations for a PhD.
Yeah, but I mean, if, for instance, someone would ask, so how do you celebrate Shabbat? And
Sure.
You say, like, it's just about how the person deals with the question. But if they would say, like, Shabbat, well, I light candles or something like this. I mean, this is
Sure.
not dealing, it's basically, I know nothing about Judaism.
Yeah.
And so there are actually questions that it's not just about how are you dealing, how are you struggling, how are you,
Sure.
how do you approach a problem or a question. It's just there are some things that really have to, you have to know what Shabbat is.
So welcome, everyone. We're pulling back the curtain now, and this is a discussion you're not going to get very often. All right, so let's say that happens. Let's take that. That's a powerful possible thing, and yes, I've experienced something like that. So if I were sitting on a Beit Din and it was not my candidate who was there, and I asked that question, and the answer was clear that they didn't know what Shabbat was, the first thing that I would do is I would do a follow-up question. So if I said, what do you do for Shabbat? And they said, well, I light candles. Then I would say, what do you think Shabbat means and why do you think it's important? So I would see if, people are going to cognitively interact with the concept of mitzvot in different ways depending on who they are. And so some people interact with Judaism very much strictly through the rules. And sometimes you'll see people who are non-neurotypical who will react very much at a legal rules-based. And if I ask purely philosophical or symbolic questions, it might not be appropriate, it might not be respectful to how that person is cognitively able to interact with Judaism. So my first question, if I am a little concerned with the answer, I will not assume that that's the end of the question. If I have a concern, I will go deeper, so much so that I will also lead in trying to find an answer to see if the person's just really nervous, because sometimes that's exactly what's going on. If I get to that level where I've asked follow-ups, where I've tried to see if it's just nervousness and I can't get anything else out, then what we usually do, curtains aside, everyone, we're going to, every time there's a Beit Din, I will always send the candidate out of the room so that the rabbis that are present can discuss. Sometimes that's completely arbitrary. It's already so crystal clear that someone is going to have their Teudah signed and go through the mikveh. On other occasions, the conversation is going to be, I might look at the rabbi who is called the Beit Din and it's their candidate and say, I'm really concerned about this. Do you have other information that you can give me? And if the rabbi says, listen, here are my interactions with this person. I know that they have this knowledge. They are clearly terrified. This does not accurately reflect with what I know. I will trust my colleague 100% on that one. If the colleague at that point says, I'm concerned about this too, then I'm not going to sign the Teudah. So that's kind of the curtain pulled aside. If someone has made it to Beit Din and they've gone through a minimum of a year of the process, meaning that they've been in guidance through an entire cycle of the Jewish calendar, and they come there and the rabbi who sponsored them says they have fulfilled all the requirements that I've given them, I will trust my colleague. And I think that that's very important. My colleague has a smicha as well. I might not agree with how they did it, but they've brought this candidate forward.
But this is interesting because I remember, I think it was 20 years ago or so, there was a German celebrity, I would say, who wanted to marry, like a female who wanted to marry a Jewish guy.
Mm-hmm.
And she then went to the United States, did like a 6 week or whatnot reform conversion process, and then had a Beit Din and was Jewish. And I remember that the German Jewish public kind of was, not so happy about this and talked down to her, and she took an easy path and whatnot. So what I want to say is, like, in the United States, I guess that's much easier to walk through.
So yeah, so we're stepping into areas that are incredibly uncomfortable, and I don't even know how. I don't think I would have done a podcast like this if I was still in a congregation at this point. And if I ever decide to go back to full-time congregation rabbinate, then I'm probably going to have to unlist half of the podcasts, which is sad, because I think that this level of honesty is absolutely needed in this level of discussion. And also the acknowledgement, 1 Torah, 2 rabbis, 3 opinions. So hopefully no one is listening to this and saying this is how it is universally. As someone who uses comparative anthropology for my doctoral work, I think I probably analyze this in a different way than maybe my colleagues would, for whom this part of the process isn't the most important thing that they do. I think leading candidates through conversion is one of the single most important things that I do. So I spend a lot of time thinking about it and a lot of time developing a different pedagogy for how it's done. So that being said, yes, in the United States of America, there used to be, and I cannot tell you if they still exist, what we called conversion factories. And those were relatively easy classes. Usually it was more like 6 months instead of 6 weeks, but you get accepted in, you go through. And I encountered one of these pretty early on, around the time that I was first applying for rabbinical school. And I was at a party after someone's Beit Din that I knew, and someone in the room had asked this person, I'm trying to remain as absolute neutral as possible, who, what, when, where, how, and why, had said, so you were at shul today, were you called up onto the bima? And this person said, what's a bima? And so anyone who's converted with me, you probably already know that's the ontos for why you write the essays that you do. So before anyone goes to Beit Din, after they've read the books and had all the discussions and spent at least a year under my tutelage in the community, then they have 36 terms to identify, and they have then 10 essay questions, or 13 of which they have to answer 8 or something like that. And the essay questions are to ascertain if they've dealt with their previous belief set and built a veneer on top of it, or if they've actually redefined from within Jewish perspective. We can talk about that more later on if that's interesting to anyone. The 36 identification are things like Brit Milah, Kaddish, Kiddush, Mezuzah, Bima, etc. So 36 basic terms that are Hebrew terms that are used on an everyday basis, basic identification of ritual objects, ritual thoughts, ritual things that I believe strongly that if someone doesn't know what those are, you're not ready to go to Beit Din. And that then is also an opening door to a lot of discussion. That obviously, if someone went through a full conversion class and didn't know what a bima was, well, maybe that's just one item, but to me, that's very symbolic. Now, that goes back to the question I had earlier on who accepts a conversion from whom. And what we're actually dealing with here is the size of American Jewry, especially the size of Reformed Jewry in America. And again, all this is going to sound pejorative. It's not meant to be pejorative. In a very, very simple, quickest way that I can possibly express it, for the vast majority of the existence of Reform within America, if you converted to Judaism, you were going to spend your entire life in that synagogue or in another Reform synagogue. And so there's no reason to not convert in a way that would make sense within the community of Reform synagogues. The world does not exist in that way anymore. And the analogy that I give is my first year in rabbinical school was actually with American and British students, and I was there as a German student, which you can tell with my accent how appropriate that was. It was hilarious when I said I'm an Abraham Geiger College student, and everyone said, wow, you've got such an amazing American accent. To which the first time that happened, I said, yeah, I know I have actually this accent here, but yeah, I can do the great American accent if I need to. And it's, yes, you're welcome. My East German wife who has no accent that's recognizably German whatsoever. So what I found out that year is during the orientation, there were a whole bunch of sessions in the summer to prepare rabbis to deal with the most common issues that they were going to find as rabbis in American schools. Amazing idea. Americans do orientation better than anyone else on the face of this planet. If Germans could learn something from Americans, it's how to do orientation. School orientation, work orientation. Germans don't get it. Americans actually get that one. So go America. And after about the fourth session, I went to one of the leaders and I said, I'm happily going to sit throughout each of these sessions, but you need to know that there's not a single one of these issues that's common to American synagogues that's an issue in Germany. There's no similarity. So part of this is when you have, there's essentially 900 Reformed synagogues in the United States of America. That used to be the majority. Now it's the plurality of Jews in the United States are members of Reformed. More Jews are Reformed Jews in America than any other type of Jews, although modern Orthodoxy is the fastest growing groups, and that's changing. But if that's the case, then that's your club, that's your rules. One of the people I love dearest in American Reformed Judaism, I think one of the Gedolim of American Judaism is Rabbi Jonathan Singer. He is the co-senior rabbi with Beth Singer of Temple Emmanuel in San Francisco. And in San Francisco, there are significantly more Reformed Jews than there are conservative or Orthodox, and which would have been reflective of the case in America beforehand. I think there's 2 double bat mitzvahs or b'nai mitzvah, so 4 b'nai mitzvah every Shabbos all year long. They have 2 different chapels constantly open. That's all they do on Saturday morning is b'nai mitzvah. That's how big this synagogue is. It's a massive neo-classical Greek building in the middle of San Francisco. And when I talked to him last, he basically said, yeah, when we do something, the conservative and the Orthodox rabbis come and talk with us on how they can help. And so we lose that. If that's the reality all over the United States, then you don't have to cater to anyone else. And Reform Judaism in the beginning also wasn't very interested in sending people to Israel. Having an Israel program for Reform Judaism, I think, goes back to the 70s, I think was the first class for HUC going to Israel. And American Reform Jews were very much non-Zionist to begin with, the idea being, listen, the diaspora is just as holy as Eretz Israel, and that's very much changed over time. But if you look at the early Reform documents, Zionism was not a part of it. That was American Reform was non-Zionist. They absolutely have changed over time, and it's a different sort of thing. But if that's the case, you develop a situation where you would never think that someone who goes through my conversion is ever going to move to France or Israel or Canada.
Yeah.
And why would they ever go to a conservative synagogue? And out of all the people that I've worked with in conversion, I'd say 90% will probably go to Reformed synagogues the rest of their life, but 10% will absolutely and have gone to other synagogues and gotten a lot out of it. And that's always the idea. So for me, who became a rabbi in Germany, where I'm having to make sure that someone could be in an Einheitsgemeinde, which might be Reformed, but is probably Orthodox, I'm going to do things very differently than someone that they're going to be in another Reformed synagogue. And I'm not even saying American Reform is Judaism light. I'm just saying that if you're working within the same clubhouse rules, then you are going to have a different series of thresholds to overcome before you say you can be a full participatory member in the synagogue. And that's going to be a different threshold of knowledge and practice than there is if you're preparing someone to step into any synagogue in any country on the face of this planet.
Well, this is what I just wanted to say in defending this story that you talked about the Bima. I think what's really, at least in my impression that I got from American Reform, there are a lot of times that people just talk, they don't use Hebrew names, they just say they say the Ark and don't say Arona Kodesh.
Right.
And so that he didn't know, or she, whatever gender this person had, was, not knowing what a bima is, might probably not even mean that this person didn't get an Aliyat Torah, just use the English word for it. And didn't really understand.
They might have known that they're called to Torah, but didn't understand.
Exactly.
And I completely agree with that. And that actually makes the point on if which is not the case, of course, there's no monolithic pattern of reform in America, but if, generally speaking, people would be called to Torah instead of making an Aliyah Torah, if people, or being called to the Bima, if the general term being used by everyone is called Torah, then that's the knowledge you have to acquire to be successful within American Reform Judaism. If you have a possibility of going to the conservative shul around the corner or a modern Orthodox shul, and you might be called to Torah, then you're going to teach to what it would be like in that experience as well. And so that's really the difference. And if you are one of a monolithic group, then it doesn't occur to you. That's what I'm trying to. I'm trying to not be negative, pejorative, or judgmental on this one, because I fully understand why things developed as they did in the States. If, however, you come from a different situation, you have to think of things differently. And so my conceptualization has always been, I can't assume that you're going to spend your entire life in an American Reformed synagogue. I have to assume that you're going to, like exists today, go to Israel and maybe go to Shir Chadashah, one of my favorite synagogues in the world, or maybe go to the Great Synagogue and see what that's like. And if that's the case, I want you to be able to find your way in the prayer book. Yeah. And the prayer book might not have any English in it. So it's a different kind of teaching for a different series of potentialities. If I was sitting in a room right now with very angry American Reform rabbis who were saying, I think that you've mischaracterized this, my question that I would ask back is the world international? And if it is, then do you think that there's anything that you would need to consider in your conversion programs in order to understand that if you convert someone, they might try to be a member of an Einheitsgemeinde in Germany? And the reason that's important is because we regularly could not accept an American Teuda, a conversion document, in a Germany Einheitsgemeinde, because many American Teuda did not say that circumcision was performed, do not, if it's a male or a hatfat dam, do not say if there was tevilah. And so when I went back to the States, the first thing I did is made sure that all the Teodot had that information on it, and they did, thank goodness, for a variety of really good reasons in the state of Washington, where there's a coalition of rabbis that branched from very liberal to very conservative. And so the Teodah was exquisitely and beautifully done, kol hakavod, to my colleagues in Washington State there. But that was the first thing that I looked at is, will this be accepted if someone goes to Germany? And the other one is under halakha, your name is, I am Ploni, John Doe, or Plonit Jane Doe, son of or daughter of, and then Avraham Vasar or Avraham Avinu, or, there's various formulations that are within normative halakha today. And I've seen people convert who were Ploni ben David and Ruth, who were their parents' names, or Jane and Sharon. And there's reasons behind why that would be done in the States. One of it is to not stigmatize people. But if I get a Teodah document, according to the rules and regulations of the synagogue that I'm in that's not American Reform, that is no longer an authentic Teodah document because the naming regulations of Jewish law have not been followed. And so to not consider that one is part of a global religion is potentially problematic for the person that you are helping enter into Klal Yisrael. I would never say you need to change how you do things in your synagogue for the sake of the synagogue. God forbid, chas v'shalom, I don't have that much chutzpah. But I would ask of all of my colleagues and of myself, have we considered what happens when this person that we help usher into this relationship with Judaism then moves to Chicago and they're next door to Anshe Emet, another amazing synagogue, and in Anshe Emet, they would be required to have a different type of Jewish knowledge. Not better, not more, a different type of Jewish knowledge. And if that's the case, then we should really consider what it is that we're teaching. Either we're an international religion or we are strictly the stream, in which case we have to admit that we don't want to be in the same conversation with world Jewry. And I think that especially with the state of Israel being as Ahad Ha'am would say, a prism by which the entire world is influenced in this kind of shefa back and forth relationship. If that's the case, if there actually is a cloud of possibility, then we have to remain a part of the cloud, even if we're very far over on this side of the cloud. And at some point, we have to be aware of when we step out of that. And there are consequences to that. And the consequence is you convert someone and they're going to go to Germany and say, I converted 4 years ago, here's my Teodah. And the synagogue's going to say, I'm sorry, I can't accept that. I've had to do that twice, and I never saw those people again. And I'm required by the rules and regulations of the rabbinical bund that I am in this country. I'm required to do that, and I try to do that as nice as possible. But then that falls on me to say, I can't accept this. And this poor person is stuck with that ruling and is incredibly confused because they not only just went through 6 weeks, 6 months, a year, 2 years of a conversion process and the fear of a Beit Din and maybe even circumcision. And I've said, I can't accept this document. Now I always say, here's what I need to do with you in order to accept the document. But, you might have walked out into your synagogue and been called a fake Jew for the first time. And then you walk in here, who's this person in Duisburg, Germany with an American accent saying, I'm sorry, I can't accept this. It's devastating. It's awful. We need as Jews to understand that we are bigger than our shul.
Right.
Which might be the end of the discussion for today.
Yeah, I think I still have some open questions. But I don't.
Well, and we also had an open question from a BeitVirtuali member, which is a longer discussion.
Yeah.
So
I don't want to cut it short.
Yeah.
That's why I don't ask it now, I think. And we are already almost 1.5 hours into the podcast. So
we're going to have part 3.
There will be a part 3. And
listen, we got more feedback this week than we have via emails, comments on YouTube, various other. There's obviously some resonance to this discussion. I think the resonance is the fact that we're kind of leaving behind our fear and we're just speaking based on our knowledge and then obviously our opinions. We are not deliberately trying to be controversial, but what we're trying to be as authentic as we can.
Yep.
And there was a lot of really interesting dialogue, interesting questions that we want to bring in. Listen, if this conversation goes on 8 weeks, and it has to go on 8 weeks, then it goes on 8 weeks. And I have not heard this level of frank conversation crossing all areas. We still haven't talked about what's different if you decide to convert Orthodox, Reform, conservative. Will it be different? What will that probably consist of? We haven't talked at all about what can you expect if you actually go to a rabbi asking, can I convert? What will that look like in different streams? We haven't talked about what is the potential halakhic makeup of a Beit Din. We mentioned that last week a little bit. We want to talk about that a little bit more. We haven't talked any bit about different rights between men and women. We also haven't talked anything at all. The question of circumcision comes up, and non-binary people who are converting to Judaism, which is becoming more and more common, including some of my students, are going to have questions and concerns about that. And what do we do? What has Judaism addressed that? The answer is absolutely yes. And I think that these are conversations that are incredibly uncomfortable and incredibly important, because hopefully what we've been dancing around and has been clear, but maybe we make explicit, Judaism, the Talmud especially, but you see it in the Torah, you see it at every single level, will answer a question that's asked no matter how uncomfortable it makes us feel. And will play around and will sometimes play around with the ideas in such a way that are offensive for the sake of making a point, because sometimes we learn when we've pushed boundaries. And so this discussion will push those boundaries. I guess for some reason I've just lost the fear of that. We are going to be who we are, and these questions are worthy of discussing and worthy of disagreeing with. So, what other questions do you have? What things have you heard that you find problematic? If this discussion goes on for 8 weeks, then it's exactly what has to happen, and I'm happy with that.
Agreed.
There are apparently 5 other flavors of this, so we'll see how many of these we can get, because this was pretty spectacular.
Exactly.
All right. As always, thank you very much. Last bit of news for BeitVirtuali. Just to let everyone know, we're actually going to stop doing Kabbalat Shabbat services, at least for the time being. It looks like that is not what people are interested with BeitVirtuali. There's been very little participation, which is fine. I'm not going to force something. If it means that you're going back to your brick and mortar shuls, then Baruch Hashem, that's what you should be doing, is going back to your brick and mortar shuls. So for those of you who do participate every week, I apologize if there is a clamoring or if there's a change in world situation. We'll look at that. But it looks like what people are interested in is the podcast, being in dialogue, adult education, second class tonight, very powerful. So maybe and then of course, many of you have asked about the books that I'm writing. I can use that time to work harder to get Gateways into Judaism Volume 1 out, which I'm still trying for Q1 of 2022. So somewhere between January and March. So Damadrukken, as we say. And I guess the last question is, if you are a regular listener If you are, if you've subscribed to the YouTube channel, first of all, if you haven't, please subscribe. But if you have and you're not yet a member of BeitVirtuali, what is it that you would want to see in order for you to become a member? So let us know what is keeping you there. And if you actually just want to watch us and you don't want to become a member, that's why we have all these things up there. You know, we still think that this information is important. We want to get out there. I need to eat and pay rent as well. So, you know, there's the other part of it. But if there's a barrier for your entrance into BeitVirtuali, but you want to support us, if it's financial, then of course, participate in everything that you possibly can. And then at some point in the future, pay it forward. If you do have the ability to support us and there's something keeping you from doing so, please let me know what it is. I'd actually love to find out what that is. And we still have a live cat, so Baruch Hashem, and he's actually gained almost 1 kilo. So, goodness,
2 pounds.
2 pounds. Who knows what's actually
everyone.
happening there? Thank you all for being a part of BeitVirtuali. We will see you next week. Also, a new video coming out on probably Wednesday of this week called "I'm Religious but Not Spiritual." So, preview for that one. Take care, everyone. Thanks.
Bye-bye.